behalf of Pregame.com, I'm People's Champ Johnny Detroit. I'm here with Bryan Leonard. Let's get right to the action. And Bryan, you are technically the king of Las Vegas, at least recently, in my opinion. You're in the finals of the Cantor Gaming Football Championship. You're the only two-time finals participant in the actual contest. And anyone who wants to follow Bryan, he's going to be at the M Casino on Friday, and it'll be simulcast live on ESPN1100 Radio in Las Vegas between 2 and 3 p.m. Pacific. So, Bryan, before I get to the last two bullet points, for all of the people listening who've never heard of this, give us a quick, explanation of what the Cantor Gaming Football Contest is, how you get involved, what it cost you, and how the season's gone for you.
Basically, the contest is sort of like the Sweet 16 in college basketball. You go head-to-head every week. I've got a partner in the contest, and so the 16 people paid $5,000 entry fee to get in. Cantor Gaming also threw in an additional $10,000, so the guys in third and fourth place get their money back. I don't know the exact numbers. I think second place is $20,000, first place is $60,000. Last year was the first year of the contest, and I lost the championship in that, and I think I walked away with $20,000. I think that's what the number was. I don't quite remember, but it's a nice payback when you're only putting $5,000 in. And at this point, there's a lot of, since I don't know Mike personally, there's a lot of situations where people are either hedging. You see this in the poker tournaments all the time, people hedging out or buying a certain percentage of that person or whatever. Or, you could even bet on the guy's plays if you think he's a good handicapper, and that's happened to be what I did last year. I was going up against Scott Kellen, who up until this year, unfortunately, has been an excellent NFL handicapper. In fact, I used to buy his service, and I get plays from a lot of people. But it just so happened everything he had in the contest I really liked, so I ended up betting everything he had. So even though I came in second and only won the $20,000, I won more than that because I was able to bet his plays.
So being a handicapper and betting for a living versus also taking some of those picks, and then with the line movements and the whole fact of the selling the picks, that's a totally different animal sometimes. When you're playing in a contest like the Cantor Gaming Football Contest, are there times, for whatever reason, that you make selections that maybe aren't your best games overall, whether it's trying to protect a lead or whatever it may be? What's the thought process that's different that goes into a contest like the Cantor Football Contest where you're putting up 5,000? How many picks a week is it again?
It's 7 plays a week, and you're ranking from 1 to 7 as tiebreakers.
So what do you do different than your normal handicapping to get ready for the contest?
In reality, it's totally different. There are many games that I will use on my personal service that I will bet that I don't use in the contest, and vice versa. Last week, I had a couple plays that I used for the contest, never used them at the end because the line wasn't what I wanted it. And there's other times where I'll look at a game. In fact, there was a game earlier this year where they had Philadelphia +4. The line was 3.5 everywhere. I took the 4. I couldn't pass it up, and it was our lowest ranked play, I believe. But it was one of those weeks where we didn't have a lot of games that we really liked, and we had discussed possibly using it at 3.5, and we saw the 4, and we said, well, they're going to give us an extra half a point on a key number in the NFL. We'll take it. Well, Philadelphia got crushed that game. But so it's interesting because at the beginning of the week, I've got a list of what I want to use. Come Friday, I got a list of what I want to use. But then until I go in and check the actual numbers, we have to put our plays in at 1:30. The show starts at 2. So we have to put the plays in at 1:30. So it all depends on what the line is at the 1:30. If it's not what we want, then we change, and which also changes the order we have to put the plays in as tiebreakers.
Could a normal person come off the street and enter this contest, or is it invite only?
No, as long as you got $5,000, you're in. There's most of the guys that are in it are professional gamblers in Vegas. There are some who also have sports services, and there's guys that just happen to have money and hang out at the M, and they enter it. So it's a little bit of everything. So you never know who you're going against. And, I would say, I've been out here for, you know, 13, 14, 15 years. So I know just about everybody that's in it, or I have seen them in the sports books. But sometimes you'll get somebody, I've gone against a guy, he goes by Fat Jack. I think he's out of Oklahoma. He runs sports service. To be honest with you, I'd never heard of him, but I ended up going against him each of the last 2 years, and he seemed to be a nice guy. We got along well. But there's most of the people I know, and that's the only bad part is I'll go against a Fezzik. I'll go against, I don't want to name some guys on other sites, but guys that we all know, and I'll go ahead and have with them, and they're friends of mine, and that kind of sucks, but somebody's got to win.
Exactly. And speaking of Las Vegas, and going back in my whole, the king of Las Vegas is the Golden Nugget. They released their college games of the year. You go in and take advantage of what you're guessing is a weak number. You're betting the limit, which I believe is 1,000 a game. And at the completion of the college football season this year, you finished up 15-6. That's 71.4%. And the prior 2 years, you hit 70% with these wagers. I have a couple tickets, and what I want to do before we get to those is ask you a question. And when we get to the tickets, what I'd like to do is let's not spend tons of time, but I think it's a good lesson for newbie handicappers is, don't give away all your secret, but I'm going to go through a couple of the tickets and give me some things that went through your head or what made you make that a play, and then whether you won or lost, did you hedge any of it? Did you get a +3 by game time? It was -3, and you hedged some. So we'll get to that in a second. But the first things first, going into the Golden Nugget with their games of the year, what's the main thing you do to prepare to know what you're going to be betting?
Basically, I take my closing power ratings from the year before, and I make the adjustments based on how many people are returning, who is returning, what kind of coaching changes there are, and I make my new power ratings for this year. And then I have a pretty good idea. They've got 100 games. I got a pretty good idea of which games will be on there. Obviously, they use a lot of SEC games, a lot of Big 12, a lot of Big 10. They will use, for example, a Mountain West game featuring Boise State. Maybe Boise's playing Utah, not this year, but in past years, things of that magnitude. So you get a pretty good idea on what games they're going to use. So I use my power ratings on that, and then I just take a look at the schedule and say, okay, is this going to be a flat spot? Is this a spot where it's a look ahead? Something like that. Make a slight adjustment. Then I just go in and try to cover up. It's not as important in college as it is in the in the NFL. You cover up key numbers. So, for example, I had Ohio State +3 at home against Michigan, knowing there's no way they're going to release Michigan anything more than 3, and I was pretty high on Ohio State this year. So that was one of those games I think Ohio State went off is 4 point favorite in that game. So got ahead of that one pretty well.
All right, so what we're going to do is, I don't know if you're just calling in, if you're looking at the computer screen, and like I said, we'll just go over a couple of key points. You don't need to reveal all your secret, but just enough to make it interesting. Here's a ticket right here. You had Army +4.5, bet the max, which is 1,000. I don't remember a lot of these lines off the top of my head. What did this one close at? What did you look at to make this selection? And what did you do when it became game day when there was the line for that week?
Yeah, this is one of those games. We didn't have many of them, but this is one of the games where we got the worst of it. It actually closed 6.5, and you could have got 7 out there. This is the game that was just played last week. I think this might have been the last play I put in that day. I didn't think a whole lot of Navy this year, and I thought there was a good possibility at this point, since we were getting over the key numbers of 3 and 4, that we would be able to get Army as probably a favorite come game time. And I was getting key numbers there. Turned out, Army was probably the right side in the game. If you watch, they fumbled going in for the touchdown late in the game. But at that point, we were just trying to play off of a Navy team that I thought was going to be a little bit overrated.
But when you're hitting 71%, and this is a great example, is you're not always going to be right. Here's one right here, and when I looked at a lot of your tickets, and like you said, I didn't put them all up here. Is it looked like two teams that you were high on, and now that the season's over, you were right. Is you were high in Florida from the tickets that I seen. You had Florida in a lot of bets, and you were really high in Ohio State. Here's one Florida game ticket. Florida minus 5.5 from November 3rd. So, what made you like Florida, and what were some things that you looked at prior to knowing what the lines were going to be that you felt that there would be an edge taking Florida in these games?
Well, this one actually was one of those that collides where you want to go against a team in Missouri who is stepping up in class going into the SEC. I thought they'd have problems, and I thought this far into the season they'd wear down a little bit, and that's exactly what happened to Missouri. They had a lot of injury problems. Quarterback was out for a bit, offensive line problems. So this one worked out well. It actually closed to 17.5. So we beat this number by 12, but it was a Florida team. Even though Florida was a team I made a lot of money on this year, I thought their offense was going to be a little bit better than it was. They had two quarterbacks coming back who were pretty highly billed. The rating services liked both Driscoll and the other quarterback coming back for Florida. And I thought their defense was just going to be dominating. I like the coach, and I thought Florida, based on the season they had last year, a lot of people had given up on them. And Florida was one of the teams, similar to Ohio State, where you've got a big coaching change, number one, at Ohio State. But I also thought their defense was going to be very good. And I was actually, even though we won a lot of money in Ohio State, I didn't think they were very good defensively all season long. Now they ended up going undefeated and covered the spread a lot. So when you put out a game that far in advance, you could be wrong in certain situations. But if you have a good feel of the teams coming into the season, and you should be able to beat the line on them. And anytime you're beating the line, I mean, my feelings are the earlier you can bet something, the better if you prepare ahead of time. And there's so much out there in college football and the NFL. There's no reason not to play these games early. You're going to run into injuries sometimes, and we've done that in the past. But you got just as many chances of getting injuries on the team you're betting against. So betting against a closing line in any sport is the toughest to beat. Getting ahead of the number is the way to go, and which is one of the reasons why I go down to the Win every Sunday to bet college football, because we're playing into those virgin lines. So we've got a lot of great lines doing that. So that's a couple things that I would recommend for people who, especially people who live out here in Las Vegas.
Did you do anything with the Florida game, or did you keep your bet?
You know, I charted since I had done this the last 2 years, and we were 70%. I charted the games that I tried to middle or could have middled, and the possibility of hitting a middle was so low that this year I decided I'm not going to try to middle anything, and it worked out well. I think there was one that I had Florida State, I think -1 in a game that closed in double digits, 14, something in that range. It might have been Virginia Tech. And if you remember, Florida State ends up scoring a touchdown with like 2 minutes to go. And I covered mine, but they didn't come close to covering the spread. So that was one of those games I could have middled, but I didn't. I was very happy taking Florida State in basically a pickup situation when they were a superior team.
Louisville minus 11.5, September 1st. So I'm guessing that's opening week.
Yep, that was a game. They were playing Kentucky. This was also one of our later plays that we put in. That game, we got 11.5, close to 14. As we could tell now, Kentucky, I had really low this year. And I thought, especially in that rivalry game, that Louisville had a great quarterback coming back. They would have a lot of success here. You know, they're in a BCS game. They don't deserve it, but Louisville's far superior to Kentucky, and I wanted to bet against Kentucky as many games as I was able to. Unfortunately, as we talked earlier, they don't put too many games on featuring bad football teams. This just happened to be, I believe it was a nationally televised game, and it was a rivalry game. So this is the only chance I got to bet against Kentucky. But if they had put Kentucky on the board, I'd have had a whole lot of bets against Kentucky all year long.
Obviously, your Ohio State -3, another Florida ticket. Florida State +1, November 8th. What game was that?
That was the Virginia Tech game I was speaking of. I thought it was -1 off the top of my head, but actually I bet it a +1. It closed at -12.5. So we beat that line by 13.5. But once again, I did not try to middle any of these games.
But you had to feel really good when those lines came out and you saw that you beat it by that much. Here we got Tennessee +7.5, October 27th. What did it close at and what happened? And what made you like Tennessee plus the points?
Yeah, this is one of those games where I took the worst of it. I thought Tennessee coming into the season had a lot of talent coming back. I wasn't as high on South Carolina, and I was looking to play on Tennessee whenever I was getting over key numbers, which 7.5 I thought I was going to end up opening or closing it a number less than that. It actually was South Carolina -13.5. So we got 6 points worse on the number. And if you remember, that was a game that went right down to the wire. And we ended up winning that game, even though we had a bad number. A lot of times, when you're handicapping games of the years, you're looking at full season results, or is game to game when you're handicapping week to week. And we find this a lot in the NFL. Your thoughts on a team vary week to week a lot. I mean, you take a look at the LVH puts out the games for the following week. A lot of times it'll move 3 points. For example, the Seattle game, I think, was 3 last week, this upcoming week, and now it's like 5.5 against Buffalo. So based on their 58-0 game, the line moved 2.5 points. So what I want to do is I want to get, it's sort of like a portfolio. I want to get Ohio State. I want to get, a lot of these teams that I happen to like early in the season and play them all year long, because any given week, anything can happen. But if I've got enough of those in my pocket all season long, I know, it's similar to betting a season over/under wins. The only thing is I can hit it for more times and cover more of the variables. So if you've got an over/under 6.5 and you got 6 going into the last week, basically you're dependent on that last week to win your bet. With this, I've got many times all season long where I've got a chance to bet on or against a team I like. And to be honest with you, I thought Tennessee was going to be better than they were this year, and I was wrong on that one. But this game, we just happened to get lucky and get the winner.
You had 71%, Brian. My heart bleeds for you. So before we get to some of the Q&A, is there anything about the Golden Nugget or the Cantor contest? And this is something that I say over and over and over and over again, is you, Marco, VR, RJ, Scott, Fezzik, you guys forget sometimes, that you live in a place that you could sit and talk with guys and go to things like the Tuesday meeting, and you could go sports book to sports book, and you could bet the games of the year, and you could enter these football contests. So a lot of things that to you are just part of the game or things you do, almost like somebody wakes up and brushes their teeth, to everyone else in the rest of the country are things maybe they never thought of or aware of. So is there anything that we just went over, if you had to give a couple tips to the people listening now and the ones that are going to be watching this in the archives, what kind of advice would you give an up-and-coming bettor who, one, wants to try beating the number, like you said, to handicap, to say, like, what are some things that they should be doing in terms of power rating or things that they should be factoring in to kind of, not to the level you're doing it because you have an advantage of being in Vegas and the connections you have, but I guess to cut my babbling short, a guy sitting home in Wisconsin who on a smaller scale wants to kind of do what Bryan Leonard does, what's some tips and advice you can give?
Well, if you're looking to get into a contest, you're playing the contest. You're not. Basically, you need to know what the lines are and take advantage of the lines, whether you're in the Hilton contest or whether you're in any other Las Vegas contest when you've got lines that you're playing up against. Now, it's a little bit different in the Cantor because those are live lines. They're not stagnant lines like they do with the Hilton where you got to put out cards on a Wednesday. But there's different ways to go about it. But, if you like, a lot of the guys, and we don't see it as much anymore, but a lot of the guys will go into a contest and they'll play their best 7 plays, regardless of what the line is. I ran into that this last week against my competitor. He was playing into bad lines, and he's laying 3.5 on a game where he could have actually personally betted at -3. So if it's a game you really like, just bet it at -3. Why hurt yourself by giving it in a contest at a bad line? There's plenty of other games to bet on. Unfortunately, last week it was just the NFL. But like right now for this week, we got the whole bowl system to go off of, so I might not even know if I've won this thing until after the championship games are played. So that's one thing I would look at there, and for general purposes, as I said, get your numbers ready ahead of time. If you've got a good opinion on a game, chances are the majority of people are going to have the same feeling as you are. A lot of guys, going down to the win, they won't bet a game until they find out what the offshores are putting out on the same game. My feeling is, if I've got a good number on the game, I want to bet it before they come out.
Right.
And there's been games this year going down to the win. I had Akron plus 8.5 the one game when the game went off at like 2 or 1 or something, and I was like the only person in the world that won on Akron because I think they lost the game by 8, and I had the only 8.5 out there. Now if I'd have waited, that 8.5's gone, and I'm like everybody else who bet Akron and lost that bet. So you got to have confidence in your numbers, and it's hard to do unless you do by trial and error and chart how you've done in the past. So it may not be a one season situation, but chart it, and after you have enough confidence in it, then you can come back and put your bets in with confidence.
All right, now to the fun part, the Q&A. And like I said, we got a couple questions in queue. I had a handful of questions sent to me in advance. And what we're going to do, Bryan, is I'm going to fire the question at you. Couple quick bullet points. If it's something you really think is worth elaborating on, I'm going to leave that decision part up to you. If there's anything that maybe I have knowledge on, I'll jump in as needed. But mainly this is going to be your show. So here we go. First question. The MAC seems to be where the major conference schools go to try filling their coaching vacancies. Does this annual shuffling of coaches make picking games in this conference more or less difficult?
In reality, I don't think it makes much difference at all because you're going to recruit the same type of players in the MAC regardless of the coach. I mean, the coach from Nebraska has gone there. Is he recruiting Big 12 caliber players? No, he's not. So you're going to get the players in the MAC or the players that basically are not being recruited and not making it in the Big Ten. Most of the schools are surrounded by the Big Ten area. So the coaching changes don't really have much of an effect, and you're going to have guys in smaller conferences. We saw that this year in the Sun Belt, guys having success in the smaller conferences that are getting the jobs in the big conferences. And I cannot fault them at all for taking the money and running, because a lot of times it's totally different. You got a guy recruiting at Arkansas State, and all of a sudden he's going to Arkansas. Well, even though it's the same state or whatever, same area, it is a totally different type of recruiting. You're recruiting star players, and some of these guys just don't have that ability that they were able to have at the smaller schools. So that's why you see a lot of coaches from the smaller schools step up and not have the same success.
All right, next question. And this is a question that my guess is it has something to do for the guys that power rate the board, but I get this a lot, so this is a good question right here. When you have a college football Saturday, college basketball Wednesday, Saturday, when there's a boatload of games, what are the top things that you look for at your first glance that makes you want to look further into maybe considering that game as a bet?
That is a great question, and it's something that has puzzled me my entire career. I have charted, and I probably shouldn't say this on air, but I have charted my plays over the years, for example, in college basketball. Saturday's the biggest card. For some reason, Saturday is probably my worst day of handicapping. And I made this joke on a radio show the other day for our good friend Marco. It's sort of like Marco D'Angelo walking into a smorgasbord. There's just so much there. His mind's just going crazy about the possibilities.
First thing you do is you sell your stock in that company because their bottom line just dropped 12%.
And I did make this comment with him in the audience, so he knows exactly what I'm talking about. But you get overwhelmed, which is one of the reasons why I find it easier to make money on, for example, I've already got to play up on tomorrow's Thursday night NFL game, because it's one game. Number one, the public is going to be more involved in it, so the public, you kind of have an idea where the public's going in that game, so it makes the line a little bit looser. But yeah, I definitely have the same problem. I tend to be one of those guys who likes to look at dogs first. Maybe it's just subconsciously. When there's a big card, I look at situations, I look at dogs who I think have a chance to win the game outright. But yeah, that's a great question. I had dinner with Marco the other day, and I asked him. I said, on a Saturday college basketball, what do you do? And he's one of the guys like me that doesn't put out a lot of plays. So it's something that you just have to feel comfortable on. I don't know about you, Johnny, but if I look at a card, and let's say I'm betting 5 games on a card, and all of a sudden I like 20 games, chances are that's a day I'm not going to do very well on, because it's nothing is that clear that 20 games on a Saturday college basketball card are popping out at you. Right. So it's just something I have learned in the past. Everybody has things they look good at. Maybe it's certain conference. You break it down by conference. You follow certain conferences. Maybe you like to play favorites. You like to play dogs. Maybe you like to play teams that go against teams who maybe had a week off between games because they're a little bit rusty. There's many ways to look at it, but that's something I'm always inquiring about with other handicappers, is how they go about doing it. Because, guys will say they handicap the entire board on a Saturday college basketball. Maybe they're looking at the entire board, but it's impossible to handicap in depth when you've got as many games as there is on a college basketball Saturday.
I agree. And when we spoke earlier on the phone, I told you, one of the things that I started to do is, I went back about 800 plays prior to last year, and I think I was at like 58%. And I had a shitty year last year. And it kind of goes to what you said, is I was playing way too much volume. And I know a lot of people on the other flip side will say, if you feel you have an edge, you shouldn't pick and choose, just blanket bet. But the problem is, like you said, is sometimes if there was so much volume, one, my stomach couldn't handle the swings, and two, and I know a lot of people are going to disagree with when I say this, is I just felt I was better off filtering down and not just blanket betting. And, like you said with handicapping the board, is, I get the list of plays from people, and I'll have 30, 40 games written down. And it literally will take me, freaking 20 minutes just to write the damn games down. Then I'm looking up rotation numbers, time starts, what the opener was, what the current line is. Do any of the sharp places like the Grande or the ones on the screen, the credit shops that I know are sharp, taking sharp action? Is there any variances where, everyone has a 5, a Grande's plus 4.5 on some obscure game? Then I'll note that. And then, just me doing the numbers could be an hour plus. Toss in trying to filter down a handicapping, like you said, it's physically impossible, to do the whole card. So this is another good question. Bet sizing. Brian, say you like 5 games for the day. How do you determine how much to bet on all 5 games? And do you typically bet the same amount on all games? And I know I've always heard 2 theories. As I know a group of set of guys that bet pretty big in Vegas. And unless it's something where it's from a real strong source, meaning they were getting these weather games or something, I don't want to say a fixed game, but something where they know more about certain players who are more hurt than they're supposed to be. For the most part, they bet the same no matter what. I've heard other guys say that they base their bet value on their power rating. So using some of your Golden Nugget tickets, if you would have known, if you had Florida power rated at 17, you're getting 4, you'd be betting more on that game versus maybe Tennessee plus 7.5, and you think they should only be plus 6. For you, how do you approach it? If you have 5 games on the board that you look at, how do you determine what you're going to bet per game?
For my own personal betting, it depends on what my goal is. Is my goal to pick a side in this game, or is my goal to get the best of the number now, knowing the line's going to move, where I can come back and bet the other side later on? Since the Golden Nugget's only taking 1,000 a game, I don't worry about it. It's not a large number, which is why I'm not worried about buying back the other side. But the way Pregame does it, when we put in our plays, single, double, triple, I recommend 1, 2, 3% of bankroll. I don't have many singles. Just about everything I have is 2s. I do put out 3s, but when I put out a 2, I'm betting 2% of my bankroll on it. When I put out a 3, regardless of what the title of it is, I'm betting 3% of my bankroll on it. At that time, And I talked about betting early in the week, betting early in the season. Of course, at that point, I will bet more than 3% of bankroll on a game because I have a very good idea where that line is going and I want to get ahead of it. But when you're selling picks, and this is one of the drawbacks, is you are putting out the picks based on what the line is, and a lot of times you're putting out plays day of the game. For example, in the NBA, I mean, you can play overnight NBA, or you can play day NBA, but you don't have a week to get that bet in. So basketball, baseball, a little different because you don't have the full week ahead that you do at football. So I'm playing 2%, 3% of my bankroll on the games that I'm playing, for example, in basketball. 3% of bankroll. That's what I do. The problem guys get into, and Ed Meyer, we've talked about this off air, I believe. Ed Meyer just put out a terrific book on money management. Mm-hmm. You could pick 60% winners and go broke. Just think about that. 60% winners. Guys who do this for a living, you only need to pick 52.38 to break even. Guys will trade away their firstborn to pick 55, 56% winners. You could pick 60% winners, and if you're betting too much per game, you will go broke. And that just tells that's the major flaw that most people have. Number one, they don't know what an attainable winning percentage is, and I fault the sports handicapping industry for that because we've all been through it when these guys get on TV and talk about 80% winners, and we can have a full discussion about that. But people need to know what an attainable winning percentage is, what guys who bet for a living try to attain, and also how much to bet. And guys just bet way over their heads. There was a guy in the forum the other day who said, well, if guys are hitting 19 out of 20 of their games of the years, I'm upset. They should hit them all. That guy, I don't know who you are. You may be the greatest guy in the world. You should quit betting right now.
Exactly. I mean, and that's one of the things that I have to deal with is, and I say it in the videos is, look, when you're spending money, you should be pissed. Game of the year, let's be honest, even if you tell them they're going to bet a little bit more on it. But there's no game that if you lose, you should go broke. I mean, VR is probably the most recognizable person on pregame outside of maybe RJ, even more recognizable than Marco. VR was like 18 of 20. I think he's still up like 30, 40 units on the year. He loses his game of the year. The hate that he took, and, for the person coming off the street that lost, first time buying VR, they should be irate. But anybody that's been following him for football, starting back to the NFL preseason, and you're not up money because he lost one game of the year, this isn't something you should be doing, flat out. And real quick, just to jump in, the author of the book, Nick, is Dr. Ed Meyer. He actually sells picks at pregame. One of the smartest dudes ever. And I mean, he's written a couple of really good informational pieces. He posts on the forum every day, and you could check him out at pregamepros.com and actually go to his pros page and ask him any questions directly. And, all of the stuff that he talks with math and whatnot, he's an actual professor. When the Cleveland Indians built their new park, they went to him. They wanted so many home runs per season, and they asked for some metrics from him. And when my fat boy Cecil Fielder hit out of the old Tiger Stadium, they went to him, and he wrote some math up on the probabilities and whatnot. So, go on to the next question. What determines a 3-star play from a 2-star play, or what makes a play game of the month or game of the year? What are you seeing that you like to play that much?
Well, a lot of it comes down to the power ratings, comes down to situational analysis. When I'm putting up a free play, for example, there's a flaw in that game. If it didn't have a flaw in it one way or the other, it would be on my card for my clients. And a lot of times I will say that. I'll say, if, for example, we'll take team A minus 7.5. And I'll say if this line was minus 6.5, this would have been on our card. But because I have to pay an extra point, I am not quite as confident on it, and I don't want my clients to invest that kind of money on it. When it comes to a 2 to a 3, it not only has the best line, better line than what I thought we were going to get on it, but it has all the other situations that I have. And for example, for a game of the year, it just has everything I look for: the situation, the number, maybe the quotes from the players, just any other handicapping, the situational analysis, the trends and angles, that kind of thing. So, and that's, for a game of the year, even though on the site goes 1, 2, 3, I'm probably playing 4% of my bankroll on something I put out a game of the year, which is a lot because I normally don't recommend anybody to bet double on any game they do on any other, but that would be one of the few occasions I would do it. And even still, I wouldn't play more than 4% of bankroll on that because it still has a chance to lose. I mean, for years, I put out fives. For my personal service, I went 3, 4, 5. And I hit like 76% on fives, but guys, like you pointed out, they would bet over their head on fives, and it got to the point where it wasn't worth putting out because people were just putting too much action on that game, and I think I've had one 5-star in the last 5 years because of it. Not that I haven't felt there was 5-star type plays, I just felt terribly about a guy that you're trying to teach him money management, and all of a sudden he goes off and bets way more than he should on a single game. And that's the drawback, and there's been talk about that in the forums, is to, having games of the year. Well, we wouldn't have games of the years unless people wanted them.
Exactly.
And it's a double-edged sword. If we don't put out a game of the year, we won't get as many sales. And to be honest with you, Johnny, we're all in this to make money. Pregame would not be there if it wasn't for people buying picks. And so you don't throw out games of the years every day. I mean, it's got to be.
And that's one of the things that Pregame is, it's not where you see every single day somebody's putting out a game of the year. But, that's one of the things that, all the stuff that we try to do, making the handicappers accessible, doing these webinars, having the videos, having you guys in the forum, showing, the last 100 picks, having, if someone loses a game of the year, allowing the community members to come on and say, hey, you suck balls, why did you lose? And actually allowing that to go up there where no other major site allows that. The one unfortunate thing is one of the things that's really difficult that, we probably never could get away from is the whole naming of the plays thing is so ingrained in people. And, and the people that preach against it or whatnot, it's the reason, retail stores, auto companies, it's when the subconscious and the marketing over the years have trained you that certain catchphrases are with a certain industry. For us to go and say, this is my best play, people want to hear the words game of the year. So whether I say this is my strongest play of the year or I tag it with game of the year, that's one of the unfortunate parts of this industry that, we tell our guys, don't throw shit up just to throw it up. I haven't had a game of the year all football season. I'm hitting 68% in college and in the NFL, and I'm was doing 3 to 5 games a week per sport. I swept last week, and I'm not going to lie, the last 2 weeks I'm kind of sick to my stomach because I almost fired a game of the year on the Minnesota Vikings this week over the Chicago Bears because every single star aligned. My personal handicapping, I had the game at a pick'em, guys that I knew were on the game, and I wanted to fire it so bad, but then the number dropped below the 3, and literally that minor difference from when I was on Gil's show and it was at 3 with a little bit of weighted juice to when it got closer to game time, it goes back to the unfortunate thing of loading the plays at a certain time. I couldn't justify making a game of the year. But the God's honest truth is I would have. One of the owners of the site, one of the guys that engages with the people more than anybody within Pregame, who tries my best to make us different than everyone else, that would have been my best game of the year. And I would have, instead of saying, this is Johnny's best game, I'm hitting 60%, and if that would have been in one basket, and then a parallel universe, I would have used the words game of the year, I would have sold triple of that just because of that. So, that's something that it's really difficult, and no matter what people preach and say about the industry, the games of the year, no matter how legitimate a site is going to be really hard for anybody ever to get away from. Would you agree with that, Bryan?
Definitely, and I'm on other sites, and I've been doing this for 31 years, so there's certain sites I'll be on. Unless I call something a game of the month or a game of the year, I won't make any sales.
So, and that's one of the things is, the majority of the people like that, and that's one of the things we struggle with. And, and there was, me and RJ had a talk one time, and, this is just being openly honest, and we didn't do it. We're happy with our model. That's the reason we have our media connections. We're growing like we are, is with the audience that we have through all the work that we've done, we could easily say, you know what, I'm tired of grinding it out. If anyone's seen the car RJ drives, I mean, he puts everything back into this company. Any picks that I sell, I put back into the company. I don't take any of that money. I remember one time, like we said flat out, if we wanted to do it where we're at now with how big we are, the Colin Coward, all the Google stuff we have going on, if we said, F it, let's just make as much money as we can, it'd be better off for our pocketbooks to go that 80s style. But we don't want to do that. But the God's honest truth is we probably be making triple. I mean, what would you think, Brian? If we said, screw it, we're going to do it like the old days, how everybody else used to do it. All you pros, we're not going to show records. We're not going to allow people bitch in the forums. Everything has to have some stupid title. My Tuesday Seinfeld's on a repeat, game of the year, with the 15-0 trend that I just made up after looking through enough stats. We'd probably make triple, quadruple what we're making, if not more, because that's what people want. So that's the hard thing for us. We made that decision long ago, and that's one of the reasons we brought in guys like Brian, or we have guys like Fezzik on the video, is because we feel that that's the future of this industry. With the transparency of the internet and people being able to dialogue, eventually that way of doing things the old way is going to go away with the dinosaur. So another quick question for you, Brian. This customer wants to know, Bryan Leonard, what sport are you most profitable in your betting?
Well, most profitable in my betting would probably be college football, but I'm having a lousy college football season on my plays because, like I went and talked about before, I'm playing things early that I can't give out.
Right.
I think from a strict betting standpoint, football is where you make your money because, number one, the public is more involved in football than anything else. So you know where the line's going to go on these games. Number two, you got a full week to handicap it. Number three, if you're betting early, you know where the line's going. You're going to have the best of the line at the end of the week. For guys who have the ability to handicap a full card or close to a full card of college basketball, you're going to make more money doing college basketball because it's impossible for the lines maker to have solid lines on every single game. That's the advantage, guys. Alan Boston's been out here in Vegas for years, and that's all he does, I believe, is bet college basketball. I don't know if he has success, but that's where he spends all his time.
And that's one of the things Chuck last week, I did the webinar with Chuck Edel, and he said the exact same thing. Is, I know in the beginning of the year, these books, it's impossible for them to have accurate numbers because these kids are coming in and, unlike the NFL or maybe even like a Michigan where they know more about the players, the coaching scheme, and what's going to go on, where it's easier to adjust your power ratings. These lines makers, they don't have a staff of 50 and 60 guys to get all the information on Wichita State Central University to know what accurate power rating should be when they got 3 new kids in the starting lineup. It's impossible. Yeah, they'll make their adjustments later in the year. And this is one of the reasons I think, even with a right angle sports that many people consider one of the better college basketball handicappers, is I know guys that once you get close to conference play won't even play them. Is the lines are easier to beat early, and as you get close to conference play, they get tougher. So real quick, another question. I run a small book in the Midwest, and I'm seeing a lot of favorites covering in the NBA and NCAA basketball early in the season. Are you guys seeing this across the board? Will the odds makers adjust for this, or is this typical at the start of the season? For me, I think in the NFL, the tail end of the season has been pretty rough for books, and Stevie Wonder could see that coming because the first few weeks of the NFL, the underdogs were covering it like a 70+% clip. There's very few scenarios, if you run through any database, if you go back 10, 15, 20 years, that most scenarios end up 50-50. The lines will balance out. So when those dogs were covering early, I knew that the favorites in some of those public teams, we're going to keep covering. And another reason I know that also is I'm in 3 different survivor pools. I, in my life, have never been in a survivor pool where this late in the season, I'm in one where it's me and another guy heads up. I'm in another one where I think there's 3 of us left. And then I'm one out in Boston where there's 5 people left, but it's a pretty big pool. I mean, NFL season's almost done. I mean, I've been in survivor pools where they've been decided by week 5. So, Brian, real quick to you, with the favorites, have you noticed them covering more, or do you think maybe it's the bigger teams?
I, I don't pay a lot of attention to it. So like you said, at the end of the year, they're all going to be 50-50. Um, on an individual team basis, I definitely pay attention because you find certain teams that go underneath the radar. I mean, you take a look at Utah State and college football, they covered every game all year long except for pushing one game. So on an individual team basis, you're going to find teams that are under the radar, overrated like the LA Lakers are right now, teams of that magnitude. But as a total sport situation, it all evens out. I don't pay that much attention to it.
Using that as a base point, Brian, do you ever factor in the fact that the lines eventually do, say, balance out? That if there's that team in the beginning of the season, the unknown team per se, or maybe a underrated underdog, and they're covering, that at a certain point you follow the team enough that you feel maybe the line's starting to get inflated to balance out, and then you go make that team a goal against? Or is that something you not factor into your handicapping?
You do have to factor it in. For example, Western Kentucky, it covered like 13, 15 straight. And there was people, you could see in the line movements. When the opening lines would come out, people were betting against Western Kentucky because it was the due system. No way this team's going to cover again. In college, that's the one difference between college sports and the pro sports. In the pro sports, if the Indianapolis Colts at this point of the season are undefeated against the spread, it's the biggest story in the world. If Utah State is undefeated against the spread, nobody pays any attention.
Right.
Everybody knows all about the pro sports. So in the pros, especially in the NFL, it's a give and take situation. I talked about Seattle last week. The look ahead was 3, the line's 5.5, 6. They're going to find wise guys coming in. They will take the dog. This is overrated based on what happened last week. But in college sports, a lot of those teams, your Illinois Chicago's, you talked about some of the other teams, could run off 10, 12 covers in a row. Just last year in Kentucky. Kentucky started the season, I think they failed to cover like the first 10 games. That's all we talked about was Kentucky was supposed to be such a great team, and they weren't covering. But nobody on the national news was paying any attention to it. They just saw that they were winning.
Right.
But in Las Vegas, guys who bet for a living said, oh my God, we're getting such tremendous value based on the Kentucky name. But they weren't talking a thing about Central Michigan or whatever that might have covered 8 in a row. So if it's a pro sport, there's a lot of balance going on. But in colleges, you can make a run on a hot team.
One more question, then we're going to get to the special coupon, and I'll let Brian hype himself up. And I just want to say thanks for Brian for putting in the time. He does a lot of work for Pregame between, the podcast, the videos, being in the forums. Brian's going to have a big NFL game of the month coming on Sunday, and I'll let him talk about that in a second. So last question, we'll get to that. I'm going to give everyone who's listening right now a coupon to actually get $10 off Brian's game of the month. So last question, Brian, before we get to that and the coupon code. With NFL games this late in the season, some teams are fighting for the playoffs and some have been eliminated altogether. How do you know which teams are going to show up and which teams will roll over, and do the lines makers take this into account when putting out lines? How do you use this to your advantage?
Yeah, for myself, this is my favorite time. Well, I love the first couple of weeks in the NFL because people overreact to the preseason. But I also love the last few weeks because all the talking heads will talk about teams who need to win. It's a must-win game. Teams are going to quit. In college sports, that is true. The teams will quit. In the NFL, these guys are getting paid. They know they're not going to quit come the end of the season because they've got a contract, and the NFL does not have the kind of guaranteed contracts other sports do. So if these guys all of a sudden play lousy at the end of a season and they get cut in the offseason, people are going to look at the film on that player. What film are they going to look at? Their last few games, because that's what's fresh in their minds. And if they see a guy not giving 100%, they're not going to sign him. So in the NFL, this is a tremendous time of the season to make money by going against teams who need to win and playing on teams like the Chargers last week, who had nothing to play for going to Pittsburgh. Those are the teams you get plenty of value on late in the season. And there was a reason why most of the books in that game had 8 all week long. They were letting teasers come in all week long on Pittsburgh. And the smart books went down to like 7 come game time because they knew the situation. So that's one of the things you can take advantage of and get extra points late in the season by going against public perception.
Exactly. And I was on Gil's podcast on Friday, and me and Gil actually a side wager because I called San Diego outright. I said there's a lot of stuff I was reading about practice and with the extra equipment that they put on Ben and some changes to his shoulder pads and some comments that the coaching staff and he made. I just felt that their offense would be out of sync, and thank God I won that because Gil probably wouldn't let me live that down. So real quick, I'm going to let you hear the coupon for me. Then I'm going to let Bryan let you know about his game of the month before we close things out. Coupon code NFL10 will take $10 off Bryan's NFL game of the month. It says expires in 72 hours, but I'm going to show you guys some love. I'm going to make that coupon eligible all the way until that game goes. So once again, NFL10 will take $10 off Bryan's NFL game of the month. Bryan, take us to the promised land. I'm going to let you finish. And when you pause, I'm going to end up, close shop. So let the people know about your game of the month and why it's a good investment this Sunday.
All right, we got our NFL game of the month going this week. If you remember last week, we had our NFC game of the month at Carolina over Atlanta. Took the 3.5 to Carolina. In fact, that's the game I was talking about when my opponent in the contest went against me. He laid the 3.5. We all know what happened after the game was over. Everybody's coming back. They go, how could I have played Atlanta? How could we have not known there was a situation where they were going to take this game for granted because they had clinched the playoff spot the week before? It was common knowledge out here in Vegas, which is why a lot of the guys I respect were all on Carolina. We've got another situation like that this week. 10-2 right now, our last 12 3-unit plays. Keep in mind, we're only going to bet 3 or 4% of bankroll on this game. That's a big bet for me. Don't overdo these games just because of that. But something slightly different this week is we're not going to put the game up until after I put in my plays for the Cantor Invitational this week. I don't want to give out any of my plays to the opponent I'm going up against in this. There's a $40,000 differential between second and first place here. So I can't afford to do that. But as soon as I put out the plays in the contest, I'm going to come right back to the office and I'm going to load that play. So you're going to get it Friday. The game's not till Sunday. You'll have plenty of time on it. And it's not like the NFL where these lines are going to move very much in that time frame. So you'll still be able to get the good number I'm looking at. But we'll get ahead of this, get this number out there right now. And you can sign up, and I'll be putting that out on Friday, probably about 6 o'clock Pacific out here in Vegas.
Bryan, I want to say, one of the reasons I want to do this webinar is, you're such a low-key guy. You need people like me to give some tout out for you. And your accomplishments in the Cantor contest, also your accomplishments the last 3 years in the Golden Nugget, I think are worth giving you some love and some promotion. And once again, Bryan is his NFL game of the month on Sunday. Bryan, I appreciate you taking the hour out of your busy day. I appreciate everyone who attended. Don't forget, check out Bryan's game of the month. That's going to do it for me, Johnny Detroit. He's Bryan Leonard. I'll be back next Wednesday. And as always, from me to you guys, best of luck.